I'm Chance Dorland, and this is In-Depth, an interview program from expressnews.com where you can find in-depth reporting and other resources concerning every topic you'll hear discussed on the podcast. Months after San Antonio's year-long Tricentennial celebration seem poised for disaster, reviews of the reboot are glowing. As you might have heard, 2018 marks San Antonio's 300th year as a city. And starting Tuesday, Alamo City began celebrating the Tricentennial with Commemorative Week, a 6-day-long series of events that range from culturally themed festivals to free concerts and art installations, each highlighting a part of what makes San Antonio diverse and special. So to discuss a little bit of the history of how the Tricentennial and Commemorative Week plans have changed since, some months ago, and perhaps getting into what now seems to be good reviews of this reboot, I'm joined now by San Antonio Express News senior reporter Josh Baugh. So Josh, great to have you here on the program today for the first time. As I just mentioned, let's begin with a discussion of how we got to now this ongoing commemorative week by looking at the changes that have taken place in the planning for San Antonio's Tricentennial. So let's begin. I'd like to have you take us back a while to when planning was underway some months ago, but the planning process wasn't getting the press that those in charge were probably hoping to receive.
Yeah, so it actually goes back to about 2014, as I recall. The city council had to create what's considered a governmental nonprofit corporation that's kind of a quasi-governmental organization that was going to be tasked with developing all of the programming, doing all of the fundraising and everything for Tricentennial. So obviously we knew for many, many years that we were going to be approaching 2018. It was going to be the 300th birthday of City San Antonio. And if you look back at previous celebrations, take Hemisfair, for example, there was a lot more planning that took place a lot earlier out. And so, some people would say that San Antonio kind of got a late start, even when they started back in 2014. So they created this organization, and city manager Cheryl Scully's then chief of staff was appointed or selected to be the chief executive or the executive director of the Tricentennial Commission, Edward Benavides. And so he was tasked with oversight of doing everything, building up this entity to get to 2018. There was a board of directors that had some oversight on him, but I think that they felt that because this was the former chief of staff from the city manager, that they were there kind of just as a more or less a rubber stamp approval for the decisions that he was making. And so you fast forward, he and a small staff were doing work and doing planning. They were consulting some with the Tricentennial Commission, which were appointed residents from San Antonio overseeing this. And we first caught wind of some significant concerns that had to do with contracting between a TV station and the Tricentennial. There's been a long-standing relationship between one local station and a Parks Foundation that always handles the city's New Year's Eve celebration. And it turns out that the Tricentennial Commission was taking over that celebration, and they canceled the contract with the longtime TV station and gave it to a different local TV station who happened to employ the brother of the executive director from the Tricentennial Commission. So we wrote a big piece exposing the fact that there had been these exclusive negotiations between Tricentennial and KSAT TV, WAI, which was the station that had the long-standing contract to broadcast that event, kind of cried foul. And we showed that there was just it was a pretty unfair process. Eventually, there was an RFP put out, but KSAT still won it, and they have the exclusive rights to broadcast these Tricentennial events. And so that was kind of the first layer of the onion that we peeled back and realized that there were some issues going on. And then my colleague Brian Chasnoff dug into reams and reams. We got 10, 15, 20,000 pages of documents from an open records request, and he discovered that the city was or the Tricentennial Commission was planning on hire, and had actually signed a contract at that point with REO Speedwagon, which also kind of drew a lot of criticism. Obviously, music is a very subjective thing, but there were a lot of cries for trying to find acts that reflected San Antonio more so than a band from, I think, Kansas City that had no connection to San Antonio. So,
and not only that, wasn't something like $250,000 spent to get REO Speedwagon?
Yeah, so we actually won a big open records battle to get their contract. There was a Supreme Court case a few years ago that had to do with records contracts with Boeing, and the Texas Supreme Court ruled and basically made third-party contracts between governmental entities and their contractors virtually impossible to get. And by some chance, I guess the REO representation didn't make a particularly good argument. We fought for it, and at the end of the day, we got the contract. So we know that they were paid $232,000 for their performance. We got the contract writers, know what they asked for in their dressing rooms, and the number of stagehands that they wanted the Tricentennial to provide to them, all that kind of stuff. We don't know how much Pat Benatar was paid because they made a better legal argument and kept their contract private. But yes, ultimately, the Tricentennial spent nearly $250,000 just on that one headliner act. And that it should be noted that was private money. The commission has done fundraising, and all of the performances were paid for through private funding. So no taxpayer dollars went to that. But there's been issues with fundraising throughout. They have not hit all the goals that they were trying to hit, and so there was some question as to whether you should spend $250,000 on a band from Kansas City that doesn't represent San Antonio to celebrate San Antonio's 300th birthday. So a lot of kind of Monday morning quarterback stuff happening, but there was a lot of criticism, and I think that in November of 2017, Edward Benavides resigned his position as executive director, and that's when that shift that we've kind of talked about began. The city appointed Carlos Contreras to be the new executive director. Originally, he was going to be interim, and then they made the decision to make it permanent. So he's an assistant city manager. He has a full portfolio already with the city, and he's maintaining all of the work that he regularly does, but he's also doing the Tricentennial on top of it. And even the biggest critics of Tricentennial have said that Carlos has done a fantastic job to kind of right the ship and get the whole thing back on track, which gets us now to Commemorative Week, which we're in the middle of. And from everything that I've heard from people who have gone out and attended the different events, it's been a smashing success.
And so now you just mentioned kind of riding the ship. Let's talk about that. Do you have an idea of, because sometimes when you take over for someone who either hasn't done objectively a good job, or at least public opinion, some people are saying that a good job was not done by that person. Sometimes just showing up and doing an okay job makes you look great. What do you think particularly has happened since this change of leadership that might actually point to riding the ship, as you put it?
Well, I think the number one thing that Carlos has done, besides just being utterly competent, was he's been really strong about communication with the right people. And so there's been a lot more conversations with the oversight committee. The board is meeting regularly, and there's a lot more exchange of information. So they're talking amongst themselves in a public setting. They're getting updates from staff on all the stuff that's happening and where they are. They're getting progress reports. My understanding is that Carlos was sending weekly emails to the commission and key city leaders, keeping them informed on where things are. I think that he probably, I'm not sure lowered expectations is really the right way of framing it, but take for example the Founders Day Gala that is one of the kind of main attractions of Commemorative Week. Originally, that was going to be like a $500 ticket, black tie affair, and it had $1 million budget. And the idea was or the hope was that they were going to be able to sell enough tickets to cover the cost. But I think that there was some unease about whether that was going to happen or not. He reduced the budget to $500,000 or so. And they sold 133 or more tables of 10. So they got a lot of sponsorships, and they're using that as a fundraiser for a gift back to the city. So I think that he captured the desire of city leaders on what they were looking for Tricentennial. The mayor constantly says this is not a big party. This is about reflecting on our past and looking towards our future, and being kind of insightful and thoughtful about what's happening. It's not an extension of Fiesta. And I think that the original trajectory of Tricentennial, it was very much going in that direction of being, a year-long party. So Carlos has framed it in a way that that captures, what the will of our leadership was.
As you just explained briefly a moment ago, the Express News has been involved in at least some of these, high-profile missteps, if you will, or just these items from the planning further into the past that didn't go so well, and then they had the change of leadership that you just talked about. Do you think that would have happened on its own, where perhaps these ideas that you kind of made the point, not necessarily lowering expectations, but perhaps less grandiose would be a way to say it, was that just a natural evolution of perhaps reaching for too much, not having, San Antonio and the wishes of the people in the community at heart, going with, bands that were not from the area, that type of thing? Might this have just happened on its own, or do you think pressure from the Express News and maybe other media entities, people in the media, was really what forced this to become what it eventually did become now?
Well, I think it's important to note that there's no indication that anybody who was working on Tricentennial, who's no longer working on Tricentennial, whether it was Edward Benavides or anybody else, was acting in bad faith. I think everybody who's been working on this has been trying to do something that they feel like is good for the city, and that they're making their contribution and doing the best that they could. Sometimes, though, people work in vacuums and echo chambers, and they don't really, or they think that they grasp what is playing out is what people want. And I think in this case that wasn't happening, and I absolutely think that the media's role in all of this, whether it's the Express News or other local publications and broadcasts, I think that the local press corps in general has done a good job of ensuring that coverage reflects what people are saying, what the general public is saying, and acting as our duty in a watchdog capacity. So I think that had we not elevated this issue for our readers, it probably would not have. It may or may not have evolved to where it is now on its own. It would not have evolved as quickly, and there's no reason to believe that Edward Benavides would have stepped down from his position leading Tricentennial had there not been extensive coverage and scrutiny on the decisions that he had made.
Let's talk a little bit more about the ongoing events that are happening right now. You mentioned specifically the gala. What else could you talk about that has gone well, or at least people seem to be reacting positively to after, months ago, kind of less positive news, and then having the switch, the riding of the ship, as we've been saying all over again. What do you think's been going specifically well?
Well, there's programming that started on May 1st that runs all the way through May 6th. What's really interesting to me is that, unlike Hemisphere, where 50 years ago our city leaders decided to commemorate the 250th anniversary with a World's Fair, and they did so by capturing some geographic space in downtown. They outlined a footprint, and they developed an entire park of attractions. And so, and it was for a long period of time. And on any given day, you knew that you could go downtown, and you knew where Hemisphere was, where Hemisphere Park was, and you knew that there were these activities happening there. And so it was this kind of anchor, this tactile anchor that people could connect with. And with Tricentennial, there isn't a single space that people can congregate that is the Tricentennial Park. There's stuff happening all throughout the community from every reach, the northeast side to the southwest side, and so on. There's stuff that, the county has redeveloped San Pedro Creek, and that's part of the Tricentennial celebration this week. Is the grand opening of the first phase of that. And there's artwork that's been happening. There's going to be fireworks shows on the weekend. So there's lots of different stuff happening, and I was cynical about whether that was going to be something that could bring people together. And what we're seeing unfold this week is that, the community is coming together, that people are participating in reflecting and celebrating San Antonio's history, culture, and heritage. And I think that's, it's a pretty profound statement that despite there not being that touch point, that single place that people can be pulled to, that there's still a lot of recognition of what's going on. You walk down the streets downtown and they've got banners up and they've got their manhole covers. I mean, there's just been a lot of stuff that they've done to recognize where we are in history.
Josh, we just have a fefew more moments. I want to give you a chance to give some final thoughts on this topic. We've obviously covered a lot of ground going back originally to where we started around 2014 now. There's still time left for Commemorative Week, as you just pointed out, events happening in many different locations, not just a central area that you can always go to. Final thoughts before we say goodbye.
Well, history is still being written on this. We have reported that the focus from the leaders, the community leaders, the focus has always been on Commemorative Week. New Year's Eve was a kickoff, and then Commemorative Week was that 6 days of kind of concentrated celebration and reflection. But there's still a lot of days left in 2018. The commission, I think, once they get past Commemorative Week, their job is not done. I think they recognize that, and they're going to start talking now about how does this continue moving forward. I would expect us to have some news in the coming weeks or months about lots more stuff that's going to be unveiled. I think that we'll see stuff happen in the fall, and the big question that I have that's unanswered at this point is whether there's going to be a celebration on December 31st, kind of closing out Tricentennial. When I've asked that question in the past, the response has kind of been, well, let's get past New Year's Eve 2017, let's get past Commemorative Week, and then we'll move on to the next New Year's Eve. So again, open question, but I would not be surprised if the celebration of San Antonio's Tricentennial carried all the way through December 31st at midnight.
I guess they just have to check to see if REO Speedwagon's available for a return performance, and then December 31st.
Probably would not go over very well in the city, although there are, leaders do point out to me on a regular basis that there were 25 or 28,000 people that handled 25-degree temperature downtown San Antonio to see those folks. So there's definitely an appetite for them here.
Back by popular demand. Well, obviously a little bit of a joke there. As you said, I don't think that would be handled very well, but fun to think about. Well, Josh, it's been great to speak with you about this. It's been really nice to have a perspective going back so far to 2014, and you've really kind of woven that path to where we are now. So obviously, as we've been mentioning, Commemorative Week, still some time. And then obviously, 2018, still a lot of time left. Maybe we'll have that final special concert or something else before the end of the year. So thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And of course, a big thanks to San Antonio Express News senior reporter Josh Baugh for joining me for today's episode of In Depth, an interview program from expressnews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.